I had always considered myself someone who lived quietly and kept to myself. I liked the solitude of my small suburban street, the predictable rhythm of life where each day mirrored the last. My house sat near the end of the block, a modest two-story with a neatly trimmed lawn and a narrow gravel driveway. On either side of me, houses were spaced just close enough that neighbors could see each other if they wanted, but not so close that privacy was lost. For years, life was simple. I came home from work, made dinner, watched some television, and went to bed. Sometimes I tended my small garden in the backyard, a few tomato plants and some flowers I liked. That was the extent of my interaction with the world outside my walls, and I liked it that way. Then the neighbor moved in. First, he seemed normal. I noticed him one afternoon while I was pulling weeds. He was unloading a moving truck, a tall, lean man who moved with quiet precision, carrying boxes as if each one were fragile, though there was nothing delicate about them. He wore a plain jacket and jeans, the kind of clothes you would expect someone to wear when moving. He didn't say much to anyone on the street at first. In fact, he barely spoke at all. People waved, nodded, or made small talk, but he only gave polite smiles or slight nods in return. That was unusual in our neighborhood, where most people made an effort to know each other, but I didn't think much of it. I liked keeping my distance, and I assumed he did too. The first odd thing happened a week after he moved in. I had finished watering my plants in the backyard and stepped inside, wiping my hands on a towel. From my window, I noticed him outside, walking slowly along the edge of my property, near the fence that separated our yards. He wasn't carrying anything, just walking back and forth, as if inspecting the property. I thought it was strange, but maybe he was just checking the fence. That's the kind of rational explanation I told myself anyway. I ignored it. Over the next few weeks, his behavior became more noticeable, and it started to feel deliberate. Sometimes, I would see him standing near his windows, staring at my house for long stretches, especially in the evenings. Not just a glance, but standing still, unmoving, watching. I tried to avoid thinking about it too much. People have quirks. Some people like to watch the world outside, I told myself. Still, the feeling in my stomach was uneasy, a low-level tension I couldn't shake. Then there were the sounds. I remember one night, sitting on my couch with a cup of tea, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. From the window, I caught movement. He was in his backyard, crouched low near the fence, moving slowly from one side to the other. It was impossible to tell what he was doing, but he was clearly aware that I could see him. When our eyes met for a brief second, he didn't flinch or look away. He just continued moving along the edge of his yard as if he hadn't noticed. I told myself I must be imagining things. Maybe it was the shadows, maybe it was my imagination running wild. But I couldn't convince myself entirely. Days turned into weeks, and his strange behavior escalated. I started noticing small signs of intrusion. Nothing major at first. Small items in my garden moved slightly out of place. The gate I always locked sometimes left ajar, though I was sure I had locked it. I double-checked my locks, my doors, even the windows. Everything was secure. Yet, the feeling persisted that someone was close, always watching, always near. I started installing additional security measures. Cameras at the front and back, motion sensors along the fence, and bright floodlights that triggered if anyone approached too closely. It helped with the anxiety slightly, but it didn't stop the dread from building inside me. One night, I woke up to the sound of something scraping against the back door. My house was quiet, completely still, and the sound was deliberate, slow, methodical. I froze in bed, straining my ears to listen. It came again, a low, dragging sound, followed by silence. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The backyard was empty, nothing to indicate someone had been there. I checked the cameras the next morning. At first, the recordings showed nothing unusual, but then I noticed something subtle. The timestamp showed movement just at the edge of the fence, shadows that shouldn't have been there, shapes moving silently, too quick to be normal animals. I called the police. They came, looked around, and left after checking the perimeter. They didn't find any evidence of forced entry or trespassing. Sometimes people imagine things, one officer said politely. "You're just being cautious." But I knew what I saw, and I knew I wasn't imagining it. The feeling of being watched grew. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. Every time I returned home from work, I checked every corner, every shadow, every possible hiding place. I started keeping a small flashlight with me at all times, even during the day, just in case. My sleep became restless, broken by nightmares where I was trapped in my own house, someone moving silently around me, always just out of reach. Then, the more serious incidents began. It started with small property damage. Garden tools bent or broken, tire tracks in my driveway that didn't belong to me, footprints in the dirt near my fence that weren't from animals. I documented everything, taking photos, videos, and notes. Then came the break-ins, or what I assumed were attempted break-ins. I would come home to find doors unlocked that I was sure I had locked, cabinets slightly open, drawers pulled out. Nothing was stolen, nothing obviously damaged, but the message was clear. Someone had been inside my house. Someone had been in my personal space without my consent. I tried to confront it logically. Maybe it was a neighbor kid playing pranks. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe I was overreacting. But the cameras told another story. The cameras, which I had installed carefully, facing all vulnerable areas, captured shadows moving, figures standing still just at the edge of visibility, and always the same shape near the fence, watching. The shadow belonged to him. The neighbor. My neighbor. At this point, my paranoia had become a constant companion. I didn't want to leave the house, didn't want to answer the door, didn't want to sleep. I started carrying a baseball bat at all times, keeping it near the bed, near the kitchen, even in the bathroom. I installed additional locks, chains, and deadbolts. I considered leaving entirely, selling the house, moving to a new town. But I also felt trapped, knowing that someone had been inside my house, had been watching me, and could come back at any moment. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when I noticed the back gate was open. I was certain I had locked it the night before. My heart raced as I approached the gate. The yard was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator from inside. I stepped closer to the fence, my flashlight in hand, and that's when I saw it. Footprints. Clear, human footprints leading from his yard, along the fence, and stopping just short of my back door. They were fresh, the soil disturbed, edges crisp. My stomach dropped. He had been there, inside the invisible boundary I had believed would protect me. I called the police again, more urgently this time. They arrived, swept the area, and promised to increase patrols. I asked if they could check his property, but they said without evidence of a crime, they couldn't legally enter. They suggested security cameras and locks, the same advice as before. I felt helpless. Days later, I began noticing more subtle signs of intrusion. A window slightly cracked, a curtain moved when no wind had blown, items in my kitchen subtly shifted. It became impossible to ignore the pattern. He was watching, learning my habits, studying when I left, when I returned, when I slept. I realized I had been living under constant surveillance without ever knowing it. The fear settled into my bones. Then, one evening, I decided to take action. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't continue to feel violated in my own home. I started documenting everything carefully. Footage from my cameras, detailed logs of every strange sound, every shift of objects in my home, every shadow I saw near my property. I contacted a lawyer to understand my legal options and learned that if I could prove harassment or trespassing, I could take serious action. I also began preparing my home for defense. I reinforced doors and windows, installed additional lighting, motion sensors, and even a loud alarm system. I practiced what I would do if someone entered, how I would escape, how I would call for help. The preparation, oddly, gave me a sense of control. The final incident happened one night, about 2 months after he moved in. I had been monitoring my cameras carefully, watching for any movement. Around 11 p.m., a shadow appeared near the fence, moving slowly, deliberately. I knew immediately it was him. I called the police while keeping the cameras recording. The shadow lingered near the back gate, then slowly disappeared from view. I checked the gate. It had been tampered with, the latch bent. Within minutes, the police arrived. This time, they searched thoroughly and they found evidence. Fingerprints on the gate, footprints leading from his yard to mine, small items I had reported missing. They confronted him. He denied everything at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was arrested for trespassing, harassment, and unlawful entry. I watched from my living room, relief and exhaustion washing over me. For the first time in months, I felt safe. In the weeks that followed, I repaired my property, replaced damaged items, and installed even more security measures. I never stopped being cautious, but the fear that had dominated my life slowly receded. I learned that safety wasn't just about locks or cameras. It was about vigilance, awareness, and taking action when something felt wrong. The experience changed me. I am more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings, and less trusting of appearances. But I also learned resilience. I survived the months of fear, the constant invasion of my space, and came out stronger. My neighbor is behind bars, and my house is my sanctuary once again. I can sit in my backyard now, drink my coffee, and tend my garden without glancing over my shoulder. I know what real fear feels like, and I know how to face it. That knowledge has become a quiet power, a reminder that vigilance and action can restore safety, even when it feels like it is slipping away. I moved into the small suburban house on Maple Street during the middle of autumn. The leaves were already turning yellow and brown, and the air had that crisp, almost sharp quality that makes you pull your jacket tighter. I had been living alone for a few years after a messy breakup, and I liked the idea of living somewhere quiet. Maple Street seemed perfect. It was lined with houses that looked old but well-kept, and the lawns were neat enough to suggest people cared, but not so perfect that it felt fake. My neighbors didn't seem too intrusive. Most waved politely when I passed, and no one really lingered. I thought it would be peaceful. The house itself was decent. It had a small front yard with a wooden fence that was partially broken near one corner, the kind of thing that made you think the previous owners had either ignored it or had given up on it. Inside, the floors creaked in places, but I liked that. It gave the place character. I spent the first week unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and adjusting to the strange silence that comes from living alone. There was one house next door that caught my attention more than the others, though I didn't know why. It was old, like mine, but the windows were always covered with blinds or curtains that never moved. I had never seen the people inside, and the house gave off this faint, uninviting vibe. Nothing overtly strange, just quiet in a way that felt unnatural. At first, I barely noticed anything unusual. Life moved slowly and quietly. I would water my plants, make breakfast, and spend afternoons working from home. But it started with little things. I would notice shadows moving past my blinds, glimpses of someone standing in the corner of the neighbor's yard. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination, that perhaps someone was outside trimming the bushes or checking their mail. But it became more frequent. The shadows weren't quick or fleeting, they lingered. Sometimes I would be in my living room, and I could see someone standing perfectly still behind the fence, just staring. When I looked directly, they would step back or disappear from view. I tried not to let it bother me, telling myself people stared sometimes, especially if a new neighbor moved in. I had seen it before in other places I lived. Then came the noises. At first, it was nothing obvious, just small sounds. The scrape of metal on pavement when I knew no one was outside, footsteps in the gravel driveway next door, or the creak of a gate opening and closing at odd hours. I couldn't see anyone, but the noises were always deliberate. One night, I woke up to the sound of someone walking around the side of my house. The steps were slow and careful, as if they were trying not to make too much noise. I froze under my blanket, heart hammering, and listened as the footsteps stopped at the corner of my yard. I wanted to scream, to run outside, but I didn't know who it was or what they wanted. Eventually, they moved on, and I didn't hear them again. I didn't sleep well that night. I started locking all the doors, checking every window multiple times. I installed extra lighting in the yard and cameras aimed at the front and side of my house. At first, the cameras didn't record anything unusual. I thought maybe I was imagining it again. But over time, the evidence became undeniable. One morning, I was reviewing the footage from the night before and noticed a figure crouched behind the fence, just outside my yard, watching me sleep. The person had on dark clothing, their face hidden, and they stayed for nearly an hour before leaving. I felt exposed, violated in a way I had never felt before. I started bringing my essentials, wallet, phone, keys, to my bedroom at night. I even bought a pepper spray just in case. Days turned into weeks, and the encounters grew bolder. I began to notice objects in my yard had been moved. My garbage cans were tipped over, my mail was gone even though the postman had delivered it, and small things like plant pots had been shifted. I started spending more time watching from my windows, trying to catch whoever it was in the act. One evening, I saw them. The figure, tall and thin, moved quietly along the side of my house. They paused to peer through my back window. I couldn't see their face, but their gaze was unmistakable. My stomach dropped. I ran to the door, locked it, and called the police. They came, took a report, and said they would keep an eye on the area, but there wasn't much they could do without catching the person in the act. They suggested I install more cameras. I did. I started recording everything. Every morning, I reviewed the footage, and every night I watched. There were patterns. The figure never came in daylight. They only appeared at night, usually between midnight and 3 a.m. They seemed to know my habits, when I went to bed, when I left for the store, when I went to the backyard to check plants. It became clear. This was someone who was obsessed with knowing everything about me. I couldn't understand why anyone would do this. I had no enemies, no one who seemed to care enough to watch me obsessively. The fact that I couldn't figure out their motives made it worse. It was an invisible threat that followed me everywhere, even inside my own home. Then came the most frightening part. One morning, I woke up to find the front gate wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. Nothing else was missing or damaged, but the sight was enough to make my blood run cold. I realized they had been inside my yard while I slept, right under my nose, and I hadn't even known. I installed locks on the fence gate, added motion sensors, and double-checked every possible entry point. I thought that would deter them, but I was wrong. A few nights later, I noticed the side window of my house had scratches along the sill, as if someone had tried to force it open. The thought that someone had been trying to get inside my house while I slept made me feel unsafe in a way I couldn't shake. I started sleeping in my car in the driveway, lights on, just to feel some sense of security. The situation escalated further. One night, I came home from grocery shopping around 10 p.m., and I noticed my neighbor's house, the one that had always seemed strange, had all the lights on. I thought that was unusual because I had never seen them on, even during the day. I parked across the street, careful not to be noticed, and watched. That's when I saw it. The same figure I had been seeing for weeks standing at my gate, staring at my house. They didn't move, didn't hide, just stood there. I realized at that moment that the person was not my neighbor. This was someone else using the house as a vantage point. The realization was terrifying. I had been focusing on the wrong person all along. My neighbor might have been oblivious, or maybe complicit. I didn't know, but either way, it didn't matter. The threat was real and closer than I had imagined. I started documenting everything. Pictures, videos, detailed notes about when the figure appeared, how long they stayed, and any changes in their behavior. I called the police multiple times, and each time I felt frustrated by their inability to catch the person. The sense of helplessness grew heavier. I began avoiding going outside unless absolutely necessary. I installed alarms, cameras with motion detection, and even a small safe for important documents. My life started shrinking into this bubble of constant vigilance. Friends noticed I was anxious and tired, but I couldn't explain why. I was embarrassed, scared, and increasingly paranoid. I didn't even want to admit it to myself how serious this had become. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps on my porch. This time, they were unmistakable, heavy, deliberate, slow. I stayed frozen, my eyes fixed on the front window. I could see the shadow of the figure moving across the porch floor. Then something new happened. They tried the doorknob. The door was locked, but the act of trying was horrifying. They spent several minutes jiggling it, clearly frustrated that it wouldn't open. I could hear the faint scraping of their shoes against the mat, the rustle of clothing as they shifted weight. Then they stopped. I held my breath, waiting. Eventually, the figure retreated, disappearing into the darkness outside. I realized then that I had to take action that went beyond cameras and alarms. I couldn't live like this forever. The next day, I contacted a private security company and had them install a professional system. Reinforced locks, motion-activated floodlights, surveillance cameras covering every angle, and a monitoring service that could alert authorities immediately if someone approached my property. I also contacted a lawyer to discuss restraining orders and legal steps I could take if the person was identified. I felt safer knowing there were people actively watching, but the fear lingered. I knew that technology could fail, that someone persistent enough could find a way around it. Still, it was a start. Weeks passed, and the figure didn't appear as frequently. The cameras recorded movement along the street, but no one approached my house directly. I began to regain some sense of normalcy, though I was always cautious. I would walk outside only in daylight, check locks multiple times, and avoid unnecessary risks. The mental exhaustion from weeks of stress was immense, but I slowly adapted to this new routine. I even started thinking about the future again, making small plans for holidays, buying groceries without panic, and trying to trust the neighborhood once more. Then, one evening, the police called. They had identified a man from the footage who had a history of stalking and burglary. He had moved out of town recently, which explained why the incidents had decreased. They explained that he had likely been watching multiple houses in the area, picking victims at random. The neighbor's house had been nothing more than a convenient hiding spot for him. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the knowledge of how close I had come to real danger. I spent that night reviewing the footage one last time, understanding everything that had happened, and feeling a strange mix of fear and closure. I realized I had survived something terrifying, but I had also learned how vulnerable life could be, and how important it was to protect myself. Over the following months, life slowly returned to normal. The street felt safer now that the man had been caught and moved on. I repaired the fence, painted the house, and even started gardening again. I still check the cameras occasionally, but I don't live in constant fear anymore. I know the world can be dangerous, and some people are capable of things that are hard to imagine, but I also know that taking careful, measured steps can make a difference. My experience with the figure in the shadows taught me vigilance, patience, and the importance of taking threats seriously before they escalate. I felt stronger for having survived it, and I finally began to feel like my home was truly mine again. I moved into the neighborhood in early spring. The houses were all older, built sometime in the 70s, but well-maintained enough that they didn't look abandoned. The streets were quiet, tree-lined, and the kind where you could hear the occasional bird sing or the distant hum of a car passing. I liked quiet. I liked calm. I had just moved from a city full of noise, sirens, and people always rushing somewhere, and I wanted this change. I wanted a slower life. The first few weeks were normal. I spent my time unpacking, cleaning, and organizing the house. I kept noticing my neighbor, though. He lived directly across the street in the house with peeling white paint and the faint smell of mildew coming from the yard. He was always outside, even when it rained, and he had this habit of pacing the driveway slowly back and forth over and over. I first thought he was maybe a gardener or someone who liked walking for exercise, but it was strange. He wasn't doing anything else. No lawn care, no projects, nothing. He would just walk slowly, deliberately all day. At first, it didn't bother me. I kept my windows closed and my curtains drawn. I didn't interact with him, and he didn't speak to anyone else, at least not that I could see. My life was peaceful, but after a month or so, I started noticing things that were off. I would leave for work early in the morning and see him standing in his driveway, staring at my house. Always at my house, never anywhere else. And then sometimes, when I got home late at night, I would see him standing at the edge of his yard, looking in my direction. I never saw him move once I noticed him, just watching. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe he liked the neighborhood, maybe he had nothing else to do. Then one day, I left the house for groceries. And when I returned, I saw something that made my stomach turn. On my front lawn, near the flower bed, there was a small mound of dirt that hadn't been there before. It was soft and freshly dug. I looked around and didn't see anyone, but I noticed footprints in the damp earth leading away from it toward his driveway. I froze. I stared at the footprints, my mind racing. I thought maybe it was an animal. Maybe a raccoon had dug up my yard. But the mound looked too neat, too deliberate. It was a small square hole, not the kind an animal would make. I didn't tell anyone. I just fixed the hole, covered it back up, and tried to ignore it. But I started sleeping with my doors locked and checking the locks twice before going to bed. Every little noise made me tense. Every shadow outside my window made me jump. The next incident happened one night around 2 in the morning. I woke up to a scratching noise at my front door. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was the wind. The windows rattled sometimes when it was windy, but the scratching continued, slow, deliberate, almost like fingernails dragging across wood. I stayed still in bed, too scared to look. Eventually, it stopped. I told myself again it was nothing, just the wind. A few nights later, I caught movement from my bedroom window. I was lying in bed, trying to read, when I saw him in the middle of the street. He was staring straight at my house, even though it was dark, and he wasn't moving at all. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but he was still there. Then he slowly raised one arm, not waving, just lifted it toward the sky, and stayed like that for a long time. Then he turned and walked back toward his house without breaking stride. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't tell anyone either, because what would I say? My neighbors all knew him. They all seemed fine with him. No one ever saw him act strangely except me. The real turning point came late one evening when I returned from work. My car was parked in the driveway as usual, but I noticed something different. The back door of my house was slightly open. I never left it open. I always double-checked. My stomach dropped. I approached slowly, my heart racing. I didn't see anyone. Nothing was moved inside, at least at first glance. But then I noticed the kitchen window. It was cracked open, just a tiny bit, enough to fit a hand inside. I didn't know what to do. I went inside cautiously, checking every room. Everything looked normal. Nothing was stolen. Nothing appeared to be broken. But that sense of being watched, of being violated, was overwhelming. I stayed awake that night, sitting in the living room with a baseball bat in my hands, listening to every creak and every gust of wind outside. For the next few days, I avoided looking out my windows. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to imagine him pacing his driveway, watching my house. But it was impossible. Every time I left for work or came back, I saw him, always watching, always pacing. Then one morning, I got a call from a friend. She said she had seen someone in her backyard the night before, someone lurking, and that she had called the police. When I asked for details, she hesitated, then described someone tall, thin, pale, wearing dark clothes, walking slowly but deliberately, watching the house. My stomach sank. That was him. That was my neighbor. And he wasn't just watching me. He was watching everyone. I called the police and reported my suspicions. I told them about the yard mound, the scratching at the door, the open window, the constant pacing. They sent someone out, took statements, but since nothing had been stolen, they couldn't do much. They suggested I install cameras and maybe a security system. I followed their advice. I installed cameras all around the house. I added motion sensor lights, alarms, and extra locks. And still, I saw him. He adjusted his walking patterns, pacing differently when the lights came on, sometimes stopping to stare at cameras, tilting his head like he knew I was watching him. Weeks passed, and I became obsessed. I checked the footage constantly, recording every movement. And one night, the footage caught something disturbing. He had climbed onto my porch, carefully, silently, at around 3 a.m., and stood there for hours. He didn't touch anything. He didn't break in. He just stood, staring at the window closest to my bedroom. I could see his face in the infrared light, pale, emotionless, almost empty. I called the police immediately. This time, they came with backup. They went to his house and searched. Inside, they found evidence that explained everything. My neighbor had been watching multiple houses in the neighborhood, collecting data, making notes, even creating diagrams of floor plans. There were tools, cameras, binoculars, and other equipment. They found a journal with meticulous entries, detailing observations of people, their routines, when they left for work, when they came home, what doors were usually open or closed. It was insane. He had been planning for something, but no crime had actually been committed yet. He was arrested, and I finally felt safe. The house was quiet again. I could walk in my yard without looking over my shoulder. I could sleep without jumping at every sound. The relief was overwhelming. The police assured me that he would be kept away, that the neighborhood would be safe. And they were right. In the months that followed, I kept the cameras up, but I no longer felt the constant dread. The neighborhood returned to normal. I even started talking to my other neighbors, something I had avoided before. We shared stories about the months we hadn't known what he was capable of. Some were relieved, some were shocked, but everyone agreed the neighborhood felt safer with him gone. Looking back, I realized how much I had underestimated the danger. It wasn't ghosts or fairy tale monsters that were scary. It was real people, real threats, the kind that hide behind normal appearances. My neighbor looked harmless, even polite at first glance, but beneath that, he had been planning, observing, and waiting. The experience changed me. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings, and I learned to trust my instincts. I still enjoy the quiet streets, the slow pace, and the sense of calm I moved here for, but I never take safety for granted anymore. I keep my doors locked, my cameras running, and I never ignore the little signs that something is wrong. And sometimes, when I walk outside, I glance across the street at his empty house, the peeling white paint, the silent yard. I remember how it felt to live under that constant weight, how every glance out the window made my heart race. I remember the mound in my yard, the scratching at the door, the long nights awake, watching and waiting, and I feel a strange sense of closure, knowing that the threat is gone, that the neighborhood is safe, and that I survived. The story of that neighbor is a warning I carry with me. It reminds me that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it stands quietly across the street, pacing, watching, blending into the background, waiting for the right moment. But with vigilance, preparation, and the right action, even the most unsettling situations can have a clear, safe ending. I moved into the neighborhood during the middle of summer. It was the kind of street where everyone knew each other by face, if not by name, and the houses were close together, mostly single-story with small yards fenced in by chipped wood or chain link. I had just finished a rough year at work, and the idea of a quiet street, low traffic, and a small house to myself was appealing. The move was exhausting, long hours of packing, hauling boxes, and driving, but finally, I was settled in my new place. I didn't know anyone yet, which I found comforting. A fresh start meant I could keep to myself and not have to interact with anyone unless I wanted to. For the first few days, everything felt normal. The neighbors waved from a distance as I unloaded boxes. The mailman delivered letters without comment. And the street stayed quiet except for the occasional barking dog or the faint rumble of a passing car. I liked the quiet. I spent most of my time unpacking, arranging furniture, and taking long walks to get familiar with the neighborhood. The houses were mostly well kept, and the yards were tidy, though a few houses seemed abandoned or neglected, with overgrown grass and cracked windows. It didn't bother me. I wasn't a neighborly person, and I didn't expect to be. It started subtly. One afternoon, as I was mowing my small front yard, I noticed a man standing across the street in front of an empty house. He was tall, thin, and dressed in plain clothes, a hoodie and jeans, but he wasn't doing anything. He just stood there, watching. At first, I thought he was looking at the house, maybe considering buying it or doing some maintenance work. I waved casually, and he didn't respond. That seemed odd, but I shrugged it off. People stared sometimes, especially at a new person moving in. The next day, I noticed him again. This time, he was sitting in a rusty pickup truck parked near the empty house, but his eyes were fixed on my house. I felt a strange chill in my chest, but I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe he was just waiting for someone or resting. Still, a small voice in the back of my mind told me to pay attention. I went inside, shut the blinds, and tried to focus on unpacking. Over the next week, his presence became more frequent. Sometimes he would be on the street, standing in a way that made it obvious he was looking at my house. Other times, I would catch glimpses of him in the evenings through the blinds, crouched near a tree at the edge of my property or walking slowly down the street, pausing to glance toward my front door. He never approached, never spoke, never moved in any way that seemed casual. It was deliberate, and that realization made my skin crawl. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was waiting for a friend in the empty house. Maybe he was a delivery driver taking a break. Maybe he had some reason to be there that wasn't threatening. I told myself this often, but at night, when I was alone in the house, I could hear the faint scrape of shoes on gravel outside my window. My bedroom was at the front of the house, and sometimes when I lay in bed, I could hear him shifting, pausing, maybe even breathing. I started keeping the blinds closed all day, locking doors even when I was home, and double-checking the windows at night. One night, around 11 p.m., I woke to a noise outside my bedroom window. My house was small, so the front door was only a few feet from the window. It sounded like someone was standing very close, maybe even peering in. My heart pounded. I didn't have a phone nearby, but I quietly crept to the living room, careful not to make a sound. From the corner of my eye, I saw him standing by the sidewalk, looking directly at my window. I froze. He wasn't moving. He wasn't doing anything except staring. I slowly backed away, grabbed my phone, and called the non-emergency police line. When they arrived, he was gone. The officer was polite but dismissive. He said it was possible someone was just walking by and didn't notice anything unusual. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him exactly what I had seen, but I knew from experience that without evidence, nothing would be done. The officer suggested I install security cameras, lock my doors, and stay vigilant. I followed his advice immediately. I bought a simple camera system, motion lights, and extra locks. The cameras didn't lie. Within a week, I had footage of him. Every day, at different times, he would appear in front of my house. Sometimes, he would just stand on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, eyes on my front door. Other times, he would crouch behind a bush, peer through the fence, or pause near the driveway as if waiting. There were nights when I caught him on camera walking up to my front door and standing there for long minutes before finally walking away. The images made me feel sick. Every time I looked at them, I felt a deep, growing fear that he wasn't just watching casually. He was studying me, learning my habits, and waiting for something. I tried to maintain normalcy. I went to work, went for walks, ran errands, and tried not to let the fear consume me. But even simple tasks became stressful. I checked over my shoulder constantly, and I noticed small details I had never paid attention to before. The pattern of his appearances, the way he would linger in the shadows, the way he seemed to know when I was alone. All of it added up. I realized he had been observing me for weeks, learning when I left, when I returned, when I went to bed. The thought that someone could be watching so closely without being caught filled me with dread. One afternoon, I came home early from work. I wanted to catch him, wanted to confront him, wanted answers. As I pulled into the driveway, I froze. He was there, standing casually in the middle of the street, hands in pockets, staring at my house. My first impulse was to drive away, but I wanted proof. I quietly got out of the car, keeping a distance, and raised my camera phone. As I approached, he started to move, slowly walking toward the sidewalk that led to my neighbor's house. I followed at a distance, careful to stay out of reach, taking photos and videos as I went. That was when I noticed something unusual. He wasn't just watching me, he was familiar with the layout of the street. He knew where I parked, where the bushes obscured the view, where I kept the trash cans, and he seemed to move deliberately to avoid being fully visible. I realized he must have been doing this for months. The thought made my stomach twist. This wasn't random. This was methodical. Over the next few days, I decided to take action. I researched restraining orders, documented every sighting, and spoke to the police again. This time, I went in person, bringing the photos and videos. The officer I spoke to seemed more concerned once they saw the evidence. They agreed to increase patrols and suggested I file a formal complaint. I did everything I could think of to protect myself. Despite the precautions, the fear never left. Every shadow outside my window, every creak of a floorboard, every car passing too slowly on the street made my heart race. I stopped going for walks in the evenings. I avoided leaving the house when possible. I even started sleeping with the lights on, the doors locked, and my phone beside me at all times. Then, one night, the situation escalated. I was in the kitchen making a cup of tea when I heard a sound at the back door. The screen rattled lightly, and I froze. I peeked through the blinds and saw him, standing in the faint light of the street lamp, looking at me through the glass. His eyes were fixed on me, and this time there was something different. He wasn't just watching, he was closer, bolder, more confident. My stomach churned. I grabbed the phone and called 911. This time, the response was immediate. Officers arrived within minutes and surrounded the area. He was still there when they pulled up. He tried to walk away, but they stopped him, questioned him, and ran a background check. It turned out he had a history of stalking and trespassing. He was taken into custody, and I finally felt a flicker of relief. The fear that had consumed me for weeks didn't disappear instantly, but knowing he was caught and that I was no longer alone gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. After the incident, I made further changes to my life. I installed more robust security cameras, motion sensors, and outdoor lights. I joined a neighborhood watch group and started paying closer attention to the people around me. Slowly, I reclaimed my sense of safety. The police checked in regularly for weeks, and I kept a detailed log of any unusual activity. Over time, the paranoia eased. I could step outside without glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. I could open the blinds without fear. I could sleep with the doors locked, but without the constant sense of dread pressing on my chest. The experience changed me. I learned to trust my instincts, to pay attention to small details, and to never underestimate the danger that can lurk in a seemingly quiet neighborhood. It also made me appreciate the value of community, even if I had been indifferent to it before. The neighbors who once waved politely became more than just distant faces. They were part of a network that kept the street safe. I met a few of them properly after the incident, people who looked out for each other, who checked in when something seemed off. It was a small comfort, but it mattered. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I ignored. The man across the street, the repeated appearances, the deliberate pacing, the careful observation. All of it was a clear pattern, and I had tried to rationalize it away. But now I understand that being aware and proactive can make all the difference. I never want to feel that helplessness again, and I take steps every day to ensure I don't. Even months later, I can't shake the feeling that my safety is fragile, but it no longer consumes me. The house feels like mine again. The street feels like mine again, and I can live without the constant anxiety that someone is watching from the shadows. I learned that vigilance, preparation, and the support of the right people can turn a terrifying situation into one that is manageable, one that ends with a sense of security instead of fear. In the end, the man was sentenced, removed from the neighborhood, and my life gradually returned to normal. I learned to lock my doors, to observe my surroundings, to take threats seriously, and to document anything unusual. More importantly, I learned that fear can be powerful, but knowledge, action, and persistence can take it away. My neighborhood is no longer just a place I live. It is a place I protect, a place where I feel a sense of control I never had before, and a place where I learned, the hard way, how real danger can appear quietly and deliberately, right across the street. I moved into the neighborhood on a dull, overcast afternoon in early fall. The houses were all modest, mostly brick, lined up neatly along streets that curved just enough to hide the neighbors from plain view. My new home was a two-story on a corner lot, slightly older than most around it, with peeling paint along the trim and a sagging gutter that ran down the side. I didn't mind. It had a yard large enough to plant a small garden, a narrow driveway, and a back porch that overlooked the fence dividing my property from my neighbors. For the first few weeks, I kept myself busy unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and getting the place settled. I hadn't met anyone yet, and for a long time I was okay with that. I liked quiet, but it wasn't long before I noticed him. The neighbor across the street. A man who always seemed to be in his yard, even in bad weather. He wasn't particularly old, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, with a thin frame and a pale face that stayed expressionless no matter what he was doing. He mowed his lawn obsessively, sometimes twice a week, even when the grass didn't need it. His garden was immaculate. Rows of vegetables, small shrubs trimmed perfectly, flowers arranged in precise patterns. Everything about him was methodical. At first, I thought it was just a quirk. Some people are like that. But soon, I started noticing things that didn't sit right with me. It began subtly. I would be working in my yard and feel the weight of someone's gaze, the quiet sound of movement across the street. I would glance up, and he'd be standing there, staring, not glancing, not waving, just standing in the middle of his yard and watching me. Sometimes he would even move slowly, pacing just enough to stay in view, like a predator circling its prey, though there was no one else around. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that I was just paranoid, but the feeling kept coming back, and it was growing stronger. One evening, I decided to take the garbage out after dark. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting long shadows that made the houses look even lonelier. I carried the bin across the driveway and, as I turned to return, caught movement from the corner of my eye. There he was, standing at the edge of his yard, holding a rake, completely still. I froze, my stomach twisting. I had to look directly at him to see if he was really there, and he didn't move. He didn't even seem to breathe. It was just him staring, as if measuring my steps, cataloging my actions. I hurried inside, slamming the door behind me, and locked it, trying to calm the rising panic. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside, the creak of the old wooden fence, the whisper of the wind against the windows, the distant bark of a dog, felt amplified, threatening. The next day, I tried to put it out of my mind. I told myself I had been jumpy, that it was just the stress of moving into a new place. But over the following weeks, the behavior escalated. I began noticing things in my own yard that didn't make sense. Items would be moved slightly from where I had left them. A chair shifted an inch, a tool on the porch no longer where I'd set it. Sometimes I would find the gate to my backyard slightly open, though I was careful to lock it. Nothing was ever taken, and nothing seemed damaged, but the implications gnawed at me. Someone was watching me. Someone was paying attention to every small move I made. It became almost unbearable one weekend when I decided to relax in my backyard with a book. The autumn sun was warm, the breeze gentle, and for a while, I thought I could ignore the feeling of being watched. I tried to immerse myself in the pages, but the sense of unease grew heavier. That's when I noticed him again, standing just across the street, partially hidden by the bushes lining his driveway. This time, he wasn't doing anything at all, just leaning slightly forward, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on me. I remember the way the sunlight caught on his thin, pale face, highlighting every sharp feature. It was deliberate. He wanted me to see him. I slammed the book shut and went inside, my hands shaking. I decided to take action. I installed motion sensor lights around my yard, cameras along the driveway, and made sure every lock in the house was secure. For a while, it helped. I could see when he came outside, when he moved around, and I started documenting it. Every day, at roughly the same time, he would be outside, doing his obsessive work, always glancing toward my house. The more I recorded, the more I realized how consistent his pattern was. Morning, midday, evening, always there. Sometimes he would linger at the edges of his property, watching. Other times, he would retreat to his house, only to return minutes later. The cameras caught it all. And yet, he never crossed the line, never touched anything, never confronted me, never spoke a word. But the menace was real. It was in the waiting, in the deliberate attention he paid to me. Months passed, and my anxiety grew into something more primal. Every time I left the house, every time I came home, I felt his eyes. I began taking longer routes to avoid crossing the street when he was outside. I found myself peering through my blinds at odd hours, checking the driveway, the yard, his house. He was a fixture in my mind, as constant as the air, and I started losing sleep over the anticipation of what might happen. I told a friend about it once, someone I trusted, and they laughed it off. Maybe he's just lonely, they said, or maybe he's bored. But the fear didn't fade. Something about the precision, the consistency, the unwavering stare made me certain he was waiting for a moment, a crack, a mistake I would make. The first direct encounter came unexpectedly. I was walking home from the corner store one evening, the sun dipping low behind the horizon, the sky a deep orange. I had my bag of groceries in one hand, my keys in the other. As I approached my driveway, I saw him standing just at the edge of his yard, his posture rigid, as though waiting for me. I paused, not wanting to provoke him, but he didn't move, and then I realized something that made my blood run cold. He had been watching the street, the entire block, his eyes scanning, waiting for me to appear. He didn't just watch me. He knew when I would come home, and I realized then that I was not just being observed, I was being studied. After that, I became hypervigilant. I started keeping notes of when he was outside, how long he stayed, what he did. I noticed subtle patterns I hadn't before. The way he always left a small light on in his garage after dark. The way his curtains were always tightly drawn at night. The way he never had visitors. I began locking every window, even during the day, and I installed additional cameras, one pointing directly at the street, one at my side gate, one covering the backyard. I even installed a small recording device near the back fence, just to capture sounds in case he tried anything. And still, he never made a move. He was patient, calculating, deliberate. The breaking point came one night when I noticed footprints in the damp grass near my side gate. They weren't mine. They weren't deep, but they were distinct, small, careful, almost cautious, like someone was testing the ground. My heart pounded as I traced them in my mind. They led to the back fence and stopped. Whoever it was had clearly been exploring the perimeter of my property. I stayed awake all night, sitting in the living room with the lights on, listening to every creak of the house, every distant car, every rustle of leaves. I felt trapped in my own home, as though I had become a prisoner in the place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. The following days were a blur of fear and vigilance. I avoided going outside unless absolutely necessary. I started carrying a small baseball bat just in case. I checked the cameras obsessively, rewinding and replaying every frame, every shadow. And then, one morning, I noticed something that made my stomach sink. A note slipped under my front door. I didn't open it immediately. My hands shook as I picked it up. It was a single sheet of plain paper, folded neatly. I unfolded it carefully, expecting the worst, and read it. It was blank, empty, except for a small, precise symbol in the top corner, like a mark, a signature. It was enough. Enough to know that he had been inside my property, close enough to the door to leave a message, and yet careful enough to leave almost nothing. It was calculated, a demonstration of control. I knew then that I had to do something permanent. I couldn't live like this, constantly on edge, constantly watched. I researched restraining orders, police protocols, and surveillance tips. I documented everything, the patterns, the footage, the notes. I spoke to the local police, who listened, took the recordings, and promised to patrol the area more frequently. They told me to avoid confrontation, to secure my property, to consider cameras and motion sensors. I had already done most of it, but I still felt powerless. The invisible line he walked, never crossing it, made him untouchable in a way. Weeks turned into months. I continued documenting, but slowly, I noticed changes. He wasn't outside as often. The meticulous mowing became less frequent. The garden grew a little wild. The constant watching, the pacing, the lingering gaze, it started to fade. I didn't know why. Maybe he moved, maybe he lost interest, maybe he sensed the attention from law enforcement. Whatever it was a relief unlike anything I had imagined. I still locked doors and windows, I still checked cameras, but the acute sense of danger began to diminish. Eventually, I realized I could breathe again. The yard felt safe, the street no longer threatening. I began to plant flowers in my garden, replacing the sense of dread with small acts of care and control. I would sometimes glance across at his house, and he was there occasionally, but the intensity was gone. The blank note, the footprints, the obsessive watching. They were memories now, reminders of a period when I had felt truly vulnerable, truly unsafe, in the place I had hoped would be home. In time, I even began speaking to other neighbors, joining the small network of Community Watch, sharing tips, building connections. I realized that fear had a way of isolating you, making you hyper-focused on one person, one threat. Once I reached out, I found safety not just in locks and cameras, but in the presence of others, the knowledge that I was not alone, the reassurance that vigilance could coexist with life. Looking back now, I understand that fear had nearly consumed me. The neighbor was real, the threat was real, but the resolution came from careful observation, documentation, and measured action. I never needed confrontation, never needed violence, just preparation, awareness, and the slow reclamation of my own space. He eventually faded into the background, no longer a shadow at the edge of my yard, no longer a constant in my daily life. My home became a place I could finally inhabit without the weight of fear pressing on my chest. The experience left scars, yes, but it also left lessons, a recognition of vulnerability, a respect for caution, and the knowledge that clarity, patience, and persistence could reclaim what fear tried to steal. I never thought I could feel uneasy in my own home. My neighborhood had always seemed normal, quiet, the kind of place where doors stayed unlocked and children played outside until the sun sank behind the trees. I moved into my house just over a year ago. It was an older property, modest but comfortable, with peeling white paint and a yard that needed work, but I liked it. Alone, I liked the quiet. The street was lined with trees that swayed gently in the wind, and most nights, I could hear nothing but distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. That sense of security lasted until I noticed my neighbor. At first, he seemed harmless. He moved in across the street around the same time I did. I saw him often tending his yard, always keeping to himself. I never spoke to him, and he never spoke to me. I assumed he was just private, maybe shy, maybe introverted. His house was similar to mine, older, with a sagging porch and a few dead shrubs in the front yard. Over time, though, subtle things began to shift. It started with little sounds at odd hours, the scraping of a chair across the floor when it shouldn't have been moving, a thump in his yard at night that sounded too heavy to be a branch falling. At first, I convinced myself it was normal. A tree branch, furniture settling, maybe he had some work being done. But the sounds persisted, and the timing started to feel too precise, too deliberate. They only happened late at night when I was trying to sleep, usually after midnight, and always when I was alone. I began to notice his movements more. Sometimes I would glance out my window while drinking my coffee in the early morning and see him standing at the edge of his yard, staring blankly across the street at my house. Other times, I'd catch him walking slowly past my property in the middle of the night, hands in his pockets, head down, but I could feel his eyes tracking me even through the shadows. It didn't feel threatening at first. It felt invasive, uncomfortable, like someone was mapping my life without permission. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had insomnia. Maybe he was lonely. But the more I observed, the less plausible those explanations seemed. I remember one night specifically that changed my perception completely. I had gone to bed around 11, the windows open because it was early fall and the air was cool. I was half asleep when I woke to a soft rustling sound outside. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound was rhythmic, deliberate. Someone was moving through the leaves in my front yard. I froze, heart racing, listening. Then I heard it again, closer this time, slow footsteps on the gravel path leading to my porch. I had left the porch light on, so shadows danced across the glass of my living room window. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 2:17 a.m. I considered calling the police, but I couldn't be sure anyone was out there. I wasn't supposed to leave my room, but my instincts screamed that someone was outside, right near my front door. I stayed as still as possible, counting every sound, every shift of leaves, every scrape of gravel. Minutes passed like hours. Then I heard it, a faint tap against the glass of my living room window. I froze completely, my chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe. Whoever it was knew I was awake. I debated screaming, calling the police, anything, but I felt rooted to the spot, terrified. The tapping came again, soft, almost impatient. I could see the outline of someone crouching near the window, a silhouette so thin that the darkness nearly swallowed it. But I knew it was him, my neighbor, my own neighbor. After what felt like an eternity, the silhouette rose and stepped back, disappearing into the darkness. My body shook for hours afterward. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I waited for the first hints of daylight to peek through the blinds before daring to check outside. The yard was empty. There were no footprints on the gravel, no disturbed leaves. Nothing. But I knew. I knew someone had been there. From that night, I changed how I lived. I started checking the locks on all doors multiple times before bed. I made sure lights stayed on in key rooms. I installed motion sensor lights along the front of my house, but the unease never left. I watched him more closely, taking mental notes of his comings and goings. I realized he kept a routine, but it was subtle, almost obsessive. He would mow his lawn at the exact same time every other morning. He would leave his house only when he knew I was gone, or so it felt. He was methodical, patient, like he was learning my schedule as I unknowingly showed it to him. Weeks passed. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But the small incidents kept accumulating. A chair moved when I hadn't touched it. Small scratches appeared on my porch steps. My garbage bins were occasionally tipped over in ways that suggested someone had leaned against them. I never saw anyone in the act, never found evidence, but the pattern was there. Someone was watching, following my routine, marking my movements, leaving signs that only I seemed to notice. One evening, I decided to take action. I set up my phone on a small tripod, pointing toward the front yard and porch. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to be occupied, checking the camera every few minutes. Hours passed uneventfully until just before midnight. The phone screen flickered. I froze. There he was. He walked slowly onto my porch, hands in his pockets, head slightly down, but I could see his eyes glinting in the faint porch light. My stomach dropped. I didn't move. I could hear the soft scrape of his shoes on the wooden steps. He stood there, motionless, looking at the door. My heart pounded. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned and walked back toward his house, disappearing into the night. I saved the footage, but I still didn't know what to do. I didn't want to confront him. I didn't want to provoke him. I felt trapped in my own home. I began documenting everything: times, dates, movements, sounds. I kept notes in a notebook, obsessively tracking patterns. It gave me a small sense of control, though it was thin and fragile. Then came the day he escalated. It was late morning, and I was watering plants in the backyard. I noticed him across the street, crouched by the edge of his driveway, a large box in front of him. I couldn't see what was inside. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it was harmless. He was probably doing yard work or moving tools. But then he stood up, and the box appeared to be aimed directly at my property. I couldn't tell what was in it, but the intent felt unmistakable. My heart raced, and I ducked behind a bush, watching. He didn't move further, just adjusted the box slightly and stayed in position. I realized I needed help. I contacted the police, explained my concerns, shared my recordings and documentation. They came, took statements, and even set up patrols in the area for a week. Nothing illegal had occurred yet, they said, so their options were limited. They advised me to maintain records, continue documenting, and reach out if anything escalated. After that, I took further precautions. I installed security cameras around the house, added motion lights in all corners, reinforced my doors and windows. I began sleeping with my phone and a flashlight in bed, fully dressed in case I needed to escape. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow across the blinds, made me tense. Weeks later, the escalation reached a breaking point. I was coming home from work when I noticed police cars parked in front of my neighbor's house. Curious and nervous, I watched from a distance. It turned out he had been caught trying to enter another neighbor's home. Someone else on the street. They found evidence linking him to break-ins in nearby areas. They searched his house and discovered tools, items he had been hiding that suggested surveillance and intent to burglarize. I realized then that my instincts had been right all along. The tapping, the footsteps, the watching, none of it was imagined. He was dangerous. The police removed him from the neighborhood, placing him into custody. It took weeks for the investigation to conclude, but eventually he was formally charged and barred from returning to the area. Afterward, the street returned to normal. The rustling sounds stopped. The soft taps at the window ceased. I finally slept through the night without fear. Even then, the experience changed me. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, wary of the people around me, and deeply protective of my home. I strengthened security, but more importantly, I learned to trust my instincts. I realized that danger isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and methodical, hiding in plain sight behind polite nods and silent yards. Eventually, the fear began to fade. I started gardening again, enjoyed the quiet mornings, and allowed myself to feel safe in my home. But I never forgot the nights I spent awake, watching shadows, counting footsteps, and realizing that the person who seemed closest could also be the one who posed the greatest threat. The lesson stayed with me. Vigilance, preparation, and trust in one's instincts are sometimes the only things between a normal life and danger. And in the end, I had survived, not because I ignored it, but because I saw it clearly, documented it, and acted carefully. That clarity saved me, and it gave me a sense of peace I hadn't known for months. I moved into my new apartment at the beginning of spring. It was in a quiet neighborhood, with rows of similar-looking townhouses and small fenced yards. The kind of place where you expected everything to be calm, orderly, and safe. I had spent weeks packing and unpacking, and I was thrilled to finally have my own space. I had been living with roommates for years, and this was the first time I could lock my door at night and not worry about someone else leaving their dirty dishes in my sink or using my shampoo. Everything seemed normal, perfect even, until I started noticing the little things. My neighbor lived directly across from me, on the other side of a narrow alley that separated our buildings. At first, I didn't pay much attention to him. He was a man in his late 40s, always dressed in dark clothing, a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He didn't smile much, didn't wave, and seemed to come and go at odd hours. During the day, I might see him walking to his car, sometimes carrying what looked like large bags, sometimes just standing by the mailbox, staring at nothing. At first, I assumed he worked weird hours, maybe nights, maybe early mornings. I had no reason to think much of it. The first sign that something was off came about 2 weeks after I moved in. I was unloading groceries when I noticed him in his car, parked at an odd angle near the alley. He seemed to be staring at my window. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. Maybe he was checking something on his phone. Maybe he was adjusting the rearview mirror. But then, the next day, I saw him again. This time he was sitting in the same spot in the car, hood up, staring. I didn't want to be paranoid. I told myself I was imagining things. People look at windows all the time. But then things escalated. It started with the noises, small ones at first. At night, when I was trying to sleep, I began hearing footsteps outside my door, slow and deliberate, coming and going. Sometimes they paused, as if someone was standing there, listening. My apartment wasn't large and the sound carried easily, but I lived on the second floor. I knew it was impossible for someone to be right outside my door without me seeing them through the peephole. I would wait, heart pounding, sometimes staring at the door for what felt like hours, but no one was there. Then I started noticing things in the morning. Small, subtle changes in my apartment that I couldn't explain. My front door would be slightly ajar, even though I was certain I had locked it. My keys would be on the kitchen counter instead of the hook where I always left them. Once, I found a single footprint in the kitchen dust, too small to be mine. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe the building maintenance had come in for some reason. But then the footprint appeared again and again. Always small, always light, but distinctly human. The feeling of being watched became unbearable. Every time I stepped out, I would glance across the alley, and he would be there, standing, sitting, leaning against the wall, always watching, always just staring. I began avoiding my windows. I kept blinds closed, lights off at night, hoping he wouldn't notice me. But there were other signs that he did. I started seeing the same car in the parking lot at strange hours. Sometimes it would be gone, then it would return, always positioned so that I could see it from my window, as if he knew I was looking. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. I am a rational person. I work in IT, spend my days staring at code, and I pride myself on logic and reason. But logic doesn't explain the feeling in your stomach when you catch someone's shadow moving in your peripheral vision, or the sense that someone is listening to you. Always. One night, it hit its peak. I had just come back from work, late, exhausted, and I dropped my bag by the door. The lights were dim in the hallway outside, as they always were. I reached for the doorknob and I froze. On the other side, in the small window of the door, I saw him, standing, pressed against the glass, completely still. I swear he wasn't just looking. He was observing, memorizing, as if he knew my every move. My heart raced, and I froze in place, trying to calm down. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Slowly, I backed away, keeping my eyes on him. He turned slightly, and then he was gone. Just like that. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. After that night, I decided I had to take action. I began documenting everything. Every time I saw him, every time something strange happened, I wrote it down, noting the date, time, and what exactly occurred. I set up a small security camera outside my door, aiming at the alley. I couldn't confront him directly. I knew that would be dangerous. I needed evidence, proof that this wasn't just my imagination. Over the next few weeks, the evidence piled up. The camera caught him several times, standing, staring, sometimes lingering for hours. On one occasion, it recorded him trying the handle of my door. He didn't get in, but it was clear he had been testing it. I reported it to the police, providing them with the video footage. They told me they would patrol the area more often, but with no concrete crime, there wasn't much they could do. I was left to feel exposed in my own home. I started taking precautions. Extra locks on the door, motion sensor lights, keeping a baseball bat near the bed. I avoided going out at night, kept my blinds closed, and installed window locks. I changed my daily routine, taking different routes to work, parking in different spots. Every time I looked out my window, I expected him to be there, and almost every time he was. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. The sun was just setting, casting long shadows across the alley. I was tired and just wanted to relax, but as I walked up the steps, I saw him. Not in his car this time. He was standing at the edge of the alley, holding something in his hands. Crowbar. My stomach dropped. I froze, heart pounding, as I realized he had been preparing to break in, or worse. I didn't panic immediately. I watched, trying to think clearly. Then I remembered the small side door at the back of the building, leading to the stairwell that went down to the street. I had used it before for taking out the trash. Quiet, easy to slip out unnoticed. Slowly, I backed away from the front steps, keeping my eyes on him. He didn't move, just stood there, the crowbar in his hands, waiting. I ducked behind a bush, heart racing, and made my way to the side door. I ran down the stairs, out to the street, and didn't stop until I was halfway down the block. That night, I stayed at a friend's house. Couldn't go back. I realized then that I needed to take decisive action. I contacted a lawyer, explained the situation, and obtained a restraining order. The next day, I packed essentials and moved temporarily into a hotel. I coordinated with the police, giving them all the evidence I had collected over the weeks. They increased patrols and checked the alley regularly. Took nearly a month, but eventually the police caught him. He had been surveilling multiple apartments in the neighborhood, selecting targets, testing doors, and planning break-ins. My documentation and camera footage had provided the evidence needed for an arrest. He was charged with stalking, attempted burglary, and several other offenses. The courts sentenced him to prison time, and the neighborhood finally felt safe again. Returning to my apartment after he was arrested was surreal. The alley looked the same, the car he had driven long gone, but the air felt different. I could open my blinds without fear, walk into my apartment without checking every corner. It took time to feel truly comfortable, to let go of the fear that had followed me for weeks. I installed a security system, cameras, and new locks. I changed my routines back to normal, slowly regaining control over my life. The experience left a mark. I was more cautious, more aware of my surroundings, and less trusting of appearances. But I also learned the power of preparation, vigilance, and documentation. I survived because I paid attention, because I trusted my instincts, and because I acted decisively. My neighbor was no longer a threat, but the memory of being watched, of knowing someone was planning to break into my home, never fully left me. It stayed as a reminder that danger can hide behind familiar faces, and that sometimes survival depends on seeing the truth clearly, even when it is terrifying. In the months after his arrest, I became more involved in the community, helping neighbors install better lighting, security cameras, and organizing watch groups. I realized that safety isn't just about locks or doors. It's about vigilance, communication, and looking out for one another. Eventually, my neighborhood returned to its peaceful routine, but I remained aware, cautious, and prepared. The sense of security I once took for granted was hard-won, and I never took it lightly again. Even now, years later, when I walk past that alley, I remember the months of fear and the feeling of being watched. I remember the small details, the footsteps at night, the footprints in the dust, the car parked in exactly the right spot, the shadowed figure leaning against the wall. I remember the moment I realized he had been planning something worse, and how I escaped. And I remember the relief of finally reclaiming my home, my life, and my peace of mind. That experience taught me more about fear, vigilance, and resilience than any book or story ever could. I moved into the neighborhood during a dull autumn, when the leaves were turning orange and the air had that sharp, cold bite that makes everything feel lonelier than it really is. My apartment was small but comfortable, the rent reasonable, and the neighborhood quiet, or at least that's what I thought at first. I had lived alone before, in different cities and different apartments, so the transition didn't bother me. I liked quiet. I liked being alone most of the time, but this apartment, with its thin walls and creaky floors, had a way of making solitude feel different. The first thing I noticed was my neighbor. I didn't see him much at first, just through the occasional glance when I walked past his door in the hall. He lived directly across from me, one of those old-fashioned apartments with a faded number plate and a tiny peephole. He was a man who seemed normal on the surface, middle-aged, average build, clean clothes, the kind of person you wouldn't pay much attention to if you passed him on the street. But there was something about him that felt off, something in the way he moved, the way he lingered at his door even when he had no reason to. At first, it was subtle. I would hear noises at odd hours. The scrape of a chair, a door opening and closing, the soft thud of footsteps in the hallway. I thought it was just the building settling or my own imagination. But then I started noticing patterns. The noises weren't random. They came at the same times every night, almost like a schedule. Around 2 a.m., I would hear him walking across the hallway, stopping at my door, the faint sound of keys rattling in the lock before he would move on. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that he had his own life and routine. One night, I had trouble sleeping and decided to stay awake, lying on my bed with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I heard the footsteps again, slow and deliberate, coming closer. My heart started to race when I realized they stopped outside my door. I froze, holding my breath. Then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible scratch against the wood, like fingernails dragging across the surface. I sat up instantly and turned on my bedside lamp, expecting to see someone. The hallway was empty. My neighbor's door was closed, his silhouette gone. I shook my head and tried to laugh, telling myself it was a bad dream, but my stomach was tight with fear. After that night, I started noticing more. Things in my apartment would be slightly out of place. My books, my papers, the small items I kept on my desk. Nothing huge, nothing that suggested theft, but enough to make me question myself. I would put something down in one spot and later find it slightly shifted. At first, I thought maybe I was just forgetful, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing day. I tried to observe him discreetly. From the small window in my kitchen, I could see part of the hallway outside his door. Most days, he would sit in the hallway outside his apartment, staring at the floor, sometimes muttering to himself. Sometimes he would watch people leave or return, his gaze lingering a little too long. I noticed that he rarely left during the day, but at night he was active, always moving, always close to my door. One evening, I returned from work around 11 p.m. I had groceries in my hands and I was tired. The hallway was dimly lit, the bulbs flickering in that familiar way. I set the groceries down and noticed him standing there, completely still, staring at my door. I didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, and I felt my chest tighten. I waited for him to leave. He didn't. Instead, he moved slowly to the stairwell, descending, but I caught a glimpse of his eyes. They were fixed on me. Sleep became difficult. I started locking my doors multiple times, checking windows, setting my phone next to me on the bed, trying to feel secure. I considered calling the building manager, but there wasn't much they could do. He hadn't done anything illegal yet. It was just a feeling, a fear that something could happen, that someone could be inside my apartment while I slept. I was careful, but my life began to revolve around him without me realizing it. One night, I heard it again. The footsteps outside my door, slow and deliberate, stopping. This time, I didn't just lie there. I grabbed a kitchen knife, small but sharp, and positioned myself near the door. I heard the scratch against the wood again. My hands were shaking, sweat running down my temples. Then I heard the soft click of a key. I froze. Whoever it was, they were trying the lock. I pressed myself against the wall, holding the knife in front of me, heart pounding in my throat. The sound stopped. Nothing else. I waited for what felt like hours, my ears straining for any movement. Finally, I heard footsteps retreating down the hallway. The next morning, I checked my door carefully. No damage, no signs of forced entry. But something had changed. I knew he had tried. I knew he had been close enough to touch me, to enter my apartment while I slept. I reported it to the police, giving them all the details. The patterns, the noises, the way he watched me. They said they would keep an eye on him, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. I installed a security camera in the hallway outside my apartment. I justified it by saying I wanted to protect my property, but really, I wanted to catch him, to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it. For days, nothing happened. Then one night, around 1:30 a.m., I checked the footage. My heart stopped. He had been standing outside my door, looking around, checking the hallway. He wasn't just watching. He was testing the lock. He had brought tools with him, a small set of picks. My stomach dropped. I realized how close I had come to something truly dangerous. I began planning. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I started looking for another apartment, saving money, making sure I had an escape plan. I reinforced the locks, added a door brace, and made a habit of checking the hallway every night. The fear never fully went away. I learned to sleep lightly, with the knife always within reach, my phone fully charged. I became alert in ways I hadn't been before. Then one night it happened again. He came down the hallway, slow and careful, like he had done hundreds of times before. I was ready. I didn't try to confront him directly. I stayed hidden, watching through the peephole. I had already called the police, giving them my location and explaining that he had attempted to break in before. I waited, heart hammering. He stopped outside my door, tools in hand, testing the lock once more. I heard the click of the door brace resisting. He tried again. The door didn't budge. I held my breath. The sound of sirens came from down the street. He looked around, panicked, then ran down the hallway as the flashing lights approached. After that night, things changed. The police increased patrols in the area. My neighbor was arrested after they caught him trying to break into another apartment. It turned out he had a history of stalking and attempted burglaries. I later learned that several tenants had felt uneasy around him for months, but no one had reported it until something concrete happened. The relief I felt was overwhelming. I finally slept through the night without fear, knowing he was behind bars. I moved shortly after that. I found a new apartment in a safer area, with thicker walls, better security, and neighbors who were genuinely friendly. It took time to shake the fear completely, to stop checking the hallway at night, to sleep without gripping a knife. But I did. I learned to trust my instincts, to take subtle signs seriously, and to protect myself without panicking. Even now, when I think back to that time, I remember the constant tension, the feeling of being watched, and the adrenaline that came with every unexpected sound. It was a terrifying experience, but it taught me a lot about awareness, caution, and the importance of taking threats seriously before they escalate. The relief and safety I feel now are profound, and I carry that lesson with me every day.